What's up, guys? I hope you all are doing well. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome back to another YouTube video. In this video, we will be looking at exercise 48 of our Python exercise tutorial series. Without any further ado, let's get to it. Exercise 48. In this exercise, you will write a function named isInteger that determines whether or not the characters in a string represent a valid integer. When determining if a string represents an integer, you should ignore any leading or trailing white space. Once this white space is ignored, a string represents an integer if its length is at least 1 and it only contains digits, or if its first character is either plus or minus and the first character is followed by one or more characters, all of which are digits. Write a main program that reads a string from the user and reports whether or not it represents an integer. Hint: you may find the lstrip, rstrip, and or strip methods for strings helpful when completing this exercise. Documentation for these methods is available online. Okay, guys, so looking at this problem, right, we see that it is super interesting. And the reason why I say that is because apart from testing us about our functions, our knowledge on functions in Python, it's also testing us on strings. And strings are kind of a big deal in Python. Honestly, like these I would say this particular exercise, yes, it's testing us on strings, but to be honest with you, what it's testing us on is kind of base level features and functionality of strings, indexing and built-in Python methods and so on. Strings in Python, when you look at strings in Python from a really broad overview, taking strings into consideration in the entire programming language, strings are really very powerful, and there's so many stuff that can be done with them, right? Because I'm talking regular expressions, I'm talking the processing of XML, HTML, all of these are text. It's all text in nature, it's strings. And so all of these categories, and I would say, I would kind of call it, yeah, I would call it categories or topics, NLP and so on. It all deals with text, and text in essence is strings. So that's why it's super interesting. In this specific one, they're not asking us for anything too difficult. Really, all they want is a simple function that's going to be able to tell the user if what they entered is an integer or not. And we are doing this really using simple techniques, right? Indexing, you'll see built-in methods or functions. We'll be using all of those techniques. So let's get to it, guys. The first thing is definition of a function. We'll call this main. Now, this main function is going to be, let's go through this prompt again. So one thing I want to bring your attention to is this one here. Write a function named isInteger. So they gave us the name of the function that's going to be doing the processing, and it's going to contain the logic for our program. That function is going to be called isInteger, and it's going to determine that the isInteger function is basically going to be the one to tell us whether something is an integer or not, which means it's going to pass a message or some form of string or whatever into the main function, the main program, right? That's what the isInteger is doing. And they also gave us some conditioning here. They helped us along, right? They told us under which circumstances is something, or rather a string, considered an integer. That's fine. They want us to have a main program. This is super important because this is the point at which we actually begin. Write a main program that reads a string from the user and reports whether or not it represents an integer. So you see this portion here. Forget the end. Let's look at reports whether or not it represents an integer. That's when we know, right, that input and output is coming from the main function, right? In essence, if you think about it logically, input The only reason why the main function is giving us or is able to give us output is because logic from other functions inside our script are basically propagating messages and data and input and output or whatever to the main function. So it's quite interesting, to talk about, because really what we just spoke about is important because it's the flow of our Python program, right? That's our code. That's how our CPU or whatever is actually rendering the code or output to us. So yeah, that is cool. Anyway, let's get to this. So the reason why I say S is equals to is because I'm just assuming S stands for string, right? The user is entering a string. You feel free, go ahead, whatever you want to call your input or your variables or objects, you can do so. So I'll be simple. I'll say S is equals to please enter a string. Okay, because as they say, S or whatever variable is storing or capturing input, it's reading a string. So that's why we say S is equals to input, please enter a string. Now, decision making should occur, right? Decision making should occur in the main function. But before we proceed to that, right, I want to take you up now. We are outside the main function. We have our isInteger function. The isInteger function has to take an input, more like a parameter, right? That's the correct word. It's a parameter. And based on the argument that's passed to this parameter, it's going to take that argument or, that value that we passed, and it's going to conduct a series of tests on it to check whether it's an integer or not. So I don't want you getting confused, right? S is the name of the parameter that we are providing to the isInteger function, right? Like most often, especially in those situations of, object orientation in Python, I know beginners tend to get confused, especially, I don't know honestly why we do that. We do that, I think, for ease, because it makes the programmer's life easier, where we give the parameter and the internal variables or whatever within the function the same name. To be honest with you, I don't like using that kind of technique, especially if we are trying to help beginners learn and grasp the concepts. But even, being programming in Python for quite some time, I still prefer to give different names. So in this case, what I'm saying is that you can call this anything you want. At the end of the day, it's the parameter, right? This is basically that temporary variable that's going to receive the argument, and the argument in our case is going to be S. Okay. Anyway, let's go back to where we were. All right, define isInteger S, and it's time for the decision making. They made life easy for us, guys. They told us exactly what we need to check for. So first things first, we need to take out, there's it here, ignore any leading or trailing white space. That's the first and foremost thing we should be paying attention to, because right, a string in essence is just characters. Now it's not necessary that maybe the user is feeling a bit fancy, and they decide to just enter a whole bunch of spaces before and after, right, as an attempt to maybe trick the program. So basically, this is why we need to remove the white spaces. White spaces are basically, space bar. There's no character. Space is technically a character, but you get the point, right? It's just no character, blank. Because in essence, you see, +1. This is having the potential to be a string, right? Essentially, what we need to do to kind of capture it as a string using the logic that we'll see just now is first remove those white spaces, those spaces, and then we're going to use built-in Python methods. As you'll see, it's kind of an interesting program. So I'm doing s is equals to s dot strip. So this is basically taking the parameter, and we are working with whatever value is stored in it now, and we are stripping the string of leading and trailing white spaces. So the reason why we do s is equals to s dot strip is because you may or may not know this, but strings in Python are actually immutable. By immutable, I mean if I just did now, like, how can I give you an example? A, B, C, D, E, F. So, I mean, this all wasn't planned, right? It's not part of the tutorial, but this is extra information that's interesting to know. So let's just take this string, right? S is equals to A, B, C, D, E, F. So that's S, right? We know what S is. It's 6 characters giving us a string. Now, if I do, now let's make this more interesting. So this is what I'll do. I'm just, S is still the same. It just has spaces. S, that's our S, right? It's got these spaces. Now, if I do S dot strip, you'll see it's removed those white spaces, right? This is good. It's actually good we're covering this because it gives you an idea and insight into what strings are, number one. Number two, it gives you an idea of the strip function in Python. The strip function is built in, right? So you saw we called s.strip. It basically stripped the white spaces, the leading and trailing ones, from the string, and it gave us our string as is. Now, if I check what s is, right? My question to you is, do you think s is A, B, C, D, E, F like this without the white spaces, or do you think it still has the white spaces? Now, logically speaking, I mean, come on, we had this thing with white spaces, we call the strip, and now it's without the white spaces. So I'm guessing, most people would say if you look at S now, it's going to be without any white spaces. But in reality, if we hit enter, you'll see S is exactly how it was, right? This is basically the meaning of immutable. I've created the string, and once created, I cannot change the representation and the structure of the string. It's fixed. The only way in which I can do that is by creating a new object, s dot strip. I created a new object. Remember, when even in Python, when we do, if I say, for example, in this situation, I had a variable called s, and I say s is equals to s dot strip. This s, the first s, this new object or variable, it's not the same as the previous s, right? It's a different one. Its RAM, memory, and location, and all of those back end or internal processes are all changed. It's all different. So that's why now if I do s is equals to s dot strip, now by calling s, you'll see s is exactly, I would say, as we were expecting, right? Anyway, I do hope that was quite interesting, kind of a small explanation there. So coming back to the important portions, it's now time for us to do our decision making. This is easy. We'll just zap through this in no time. Everything is given to us, guys. So they told us, there's a chair. A string represents an integer if its length is at least 1 and it only contains digits, or if its first character is either plus or minus and the first character is followed by one or more characters, all of which are digits. So let's do this, right? Once we code this, it's going to make a lot more sense to you if it does not make sense currently. So we're doing, if S0 is the first element, right? Python is 0 indexed. What we are basically checking here is to check if the first element in the string is a plus sign. And remember, we are doing this after taking out all of those extra additional white spaces or spaces, right? Or S0 is equals to minus. This is exactly as they gave us, right? First character is plus or minus. That's why we have it here, plus or minus. And see, the and is important, which means there's a kind of like a compulsory. I mean, all of the conditions are going to be true or going to have to be evaluated to true in order for this kind of specific if statement to be entered. And we'll say S1 onwards dot is digit. So if you didn't know, Python actually has an inbuilt method for strings called isDigit, and it does what the name says, right? It checks if a string is a digit. And I mean, I'm not too sure how this happens, but I mean, logically speaking, if we think about it, right, it probably uses a simple casting operation internally, right? Because really, that's all there is to it. Now, for example, if I do 1, right, and I can say 1 dot is digit, and it says true. So the only way in which this is possible is if some sort of casting is occurring, at the end of the process. So yeah, that's good. Um, if this happens to be true, return true. Right? You can return whatever you like. It's all up to you. And yeah, that's kind of the main one there. Else or otherwise, what we can do is, oh, there is one more we need to check. So if s dot is digit, so this is us having a decision, or a condition rather, on s in its raw form. So in the event of the user not entering the plus or the minus, we can just take s, check if it's a digit, and then if it is a digit, that's a good sign, return true. Else, no, there's no need for else, because those are the two. I mean, otherwise, in the event that none of those if conditions were triggered, what we can do is just return false. Okay, I do hope this is making sense to you guys. Just let me know in the comments, if you are finding this interesting and if it is making sense. So back within the main function, we this is all the logic we need for the isInteger function, right? It's taking a parameter s, it's assigning s to the stripped form of itself, basically, and then we have two conditions. These two conditions are taken directly from the prompt, and in the event that none of these conditions have been, kind of flagged or encountered to be true, we are returning the false to the main program, because if it's not true, it's false. That's Boolean logic. Let's go back here. Okay, so s is equals to input. That's good. Now within the main function, we may make use of our isInteger function, right? All we're doing is, if s is integer, we can print this is an integer. Else, print this is not an integer. And that's that. We've successfully catered for all the requirements that the program required, guys. This is the end of the program. We've finished coding the program. Now after coding, the next thing to do is to call it, but don't forget to call the main function. The main function is most important. Okay, I mentioned before, you can code 100 functions or 1,000 functions in your program, but if you don't call the main starting source of execution, then there's no point. So yes, we are ready to run this. Please enter a string. So for the first test, let's keep it simple. I'll do 13 without the plus, without the minus, with no white space. So let's press enter. It is an integer. Now let's enter some white space. So let's do this time maybe plus, and we can do 34. Enter more white space. Press enter. It is an integer. Then run the program again. Let's do a negative value. So negative 65, add a few white spaces. It is an integer. Let's catch not an integer. So what won't be an integer? If I just pressed enter, okay, that's fine. We didn't really cater for exception handling. That's fine. But now if I do 54 and put spaces in between and a plus after, this is not an integer. right? Because basically what this is 54 plus. That's not an integer, so that's good. The program is working, guys, and this video is clocking 20 minutes at the moment. So, I mean, we have successfully and efficiently and effectively answered this program, right? And with that, guys, thank you for watching. Thanks for staying till the end. Good luck with your work, and I'll see you in the next YouTube video.